Thank you for coming and welcome to the Conversation Room. We're just thrilled that you aren't at the Army-Navy game, but I heard the tickets were $1,000. So poetry is always free, and it's among the rarer air. So I'm Grace Cavalieri, and I'm a co-producer of this series along with Kimberly Taylor, who is the co-publisher of Annapolis Home magazine, co-published with Robert Haywood. We're a lot of co's going on here. And we have had this series for 1 year, and we are so thrilled that people who love poetry are coming. Yes, thank you. Michael Gushu is a graduate of 1978, and he's clapping because he's going to read in February, and he wants to make sure you all come back. So happy to see you. I want to thank President Pullman, who has been so gracious in giving us the keys to her house, to this beautiful conversation room. And thank you to Frank Ralsum, who supported the 2025 series in honor of his late wife, Nancy Buchenauer, who taught her whole life at Santa Fe as a tutor and was one of our dearest friends. So we're so grateful that this is a St. John's occasion. So how this will work is that I will introduce Kimberly, and she will present our guest, David Gawanter, who's been a pillar of poetry in Washington for 30 years and is loved and beloved by me and other people. And his poetry is really memorable. You're going to love it. How this is that David will read for 20 or 25 minutes, however he chooses. Then we will circulate a poem of his for your conversation, because this is a conversation room, and we want to know what you think of what you read. And now there will be a book signing afterwards, right across the green. We have 2 of David's books for you, and you can meet him in the flesh and talk to him more. So here's Kimberly Taylor, who is the publisher of Annapolis Home, poet herself from Columbia University, and co-conspirator of this series.
Thank you all for coming out. It is always just really fabulous to see you. I just love Saturday afternoons in the conversation room, and we're just so grateful to have an amazing environment with the scholarly ambiance as well. Our poet today, David Gawanter, continues a highly distinguished career in poetry. I have heard 2 kind of funny things today, just to set this up, that he is sometimes known as the Beyonce of poetry, and that he could have been a prostitute in a past life. Now, I will actually be more behaved with this introduction. He is a professor at Georgetown University and the author of several collections of poetry, including The Belly, winner of the Plowshares John C. Zacharis First Book Award, and Warbird. Gawanter writes a layered lyrical poetry of ideas that often explores themes of family, nature, reason, with often strong political and social currents running through those poems. Reviewing one of his books called The Sleep of Reason, a finalist for the Academy of American Poets James Laughlin Award, poet David Orr described his work as, quote, a writer who seems to possess that most curious and necessary of literary attributes, a moral vision, which today is probably much needed. Without much further ado, I welcome David Gawanter. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kimberly. I have 2 teas here.
2 teas for David.
I'm not going to drink either of them. Thank you for the introductions. Very kind. I can only disappoint at this stage. I have mobility problems, so, as is evident. I started off my teaching career as an ESL teacher, and we would do exercises where you get them to write a story, and you'd key them by giving them an adverb like first, then, next, and finally, and they would finish out the sentence. So this first poem, which I now have to find. It's called English 1. Can you hear me all right? I just wanted to mention that the people on the lower level, the people on the upper level are not making fun of you behind your backs. So the first word of each line will be the prompt from the teacher. First, next, then, meanwhile, and then, later, and finally. So the poem is English 1. First, we tied to each other. Next, coconuts for the swimming. Then, the boat soldiers shoot. Meanwhile, many dying. And then, we swam with dead people. Later, we get on the land. Finally, we left our dead friends. What grade does this exercise deserve? Homework folded like a handkerchief, a little book of tears, burns escape. And still I mark the blasphemies of punctuation, common speech. The English tune will help them live. Rickety Hmong boy, flirting simply with the loud girl from Managua. I taught him how to ask her out. Taught her how to say no, nicely. My accent and suburban decorums are tidy and authoritative as the checks I make for right answers, the rosy golf clubs on the page. By next year, they'll talk their way out of trouble instead of smiling as they do hearing me drone Silent Night. They join in, shy and hypnotized, Saigon chemist, cowed Haitian, miming the words I once told my music teacher that Jews shouldn't sing. Holy infant. My father was a pathologist and took me to work at his office, which was a dead body. I was probably too young to see what I saw, but my brother and sister had gone, and I wasn't going to be left behind. Autopsy means witness. My father's autopsy, the one he did, that is, and took me to when I was 13. I turned as white as the old woman lying naked there, but as he clanked out tools, I inspected her quickly, the dead cinder of her nipples, the stiff tuft at her crotch. Still black, wouldn't it turn gray? Dad took stock of her length, weight, muscle tone, telling me or the microphone how she lived, what made her sick. Like being a detective, he said, except I answer my own questions. Here, touch this. But I wouldn't, and I wanted her body to resist interrogation, prayed weirdly that she never said, ah, for a doctor. Then he slit and sawed her down the middle. She opened as easily as a yam or a duffel bag. Dipping delicately in, Dad scooped out a handful of stuff, all jumbly like underwear from Mom's dresser. He read her guts like a priest, probing the tubes, slicing wafers from her heart, so thin they would glow under lens light. At last, she yielded him a brown pebble, which I felt between his finger and thumb. Then he put it back. Death's story, deduced from facts hard as bone. As he talked me through it, I could hear the joyful lift in his voice. He had little patience for his house, its prattling, unready anatomies, his wife's incompetent housekeeping. At night, he sat over journals and drinks, compact, severe, inward as a microscope. Now he's home all day, waiting for the mail, hasn't cut a corpse for years. He calls every weekend, his news familiar as a backache, and we talk without fear. Once I thought my pen would open him here like the corpse on its single pan of judgment, but as I cover this pan with pages, he is alive on another one. I think we'll move on from this little ditty.
You want a secretary?
The secretary keeps secrets.
I see you got good letter, okay.
This is a backward alphabet poem. My teacher, Robert Pinsky, wrote a really good abecedarian poem. Anybody can die, evidently, were the first terms of it. And I liked it, but I'm competitive. So this one is zero account. It's 26 words from Z to A, backward. Zero account. Your ex, withdrawn, vengeful, undertakes the spousal ripoff. Quivering passion, once negated, murders love. Kindness? Justice is how greed frames every divorce. Cupid's backstabbing alphabet. I think we've been through a few things here, if you're applauding at that. My sister lost thousands of dollars, and I got $25 for publishing that poem. So I figure we're equal. My first poetry teacher was Tom Gunn, the wonderful poet. And I'm going to read a poem about him in a minute. There's another poet who had the same name as a student of mine, Charles Bernstein, the experimental poet. And my student was Charlie Bernstein. So this happened. I read this to Grace, and she said I ought to have my head examined. It turned out negative. So this poem is called The Unspeakable. My student Charlie Bernstein, strapping, curly hair, about to take a step, like Rilke's blind man, pondering, fingers at his lips. He wrote poems about flowers, hillsides, the girls he would bring there, and I nudged him. Send your stuff to the poet Charles Bernstein. He says language writes his poems. He says that these dimensions are the material of which the writing. This guy should meet another Charles Bernstein. Tell him you wrote his books. Curse my tongue. The boy never mailed them, but after he left school, he was driving all night through Texas, and a truck killed him. I met Professor Bernstein once, stooped, alive, and told him about Charlie. He said, and I answered, 2 dray horses champing at seeds and forage. We often hear that poets dream up their poems. It doesn't happen to me. I dream bad Tokyo movies. But I did have a dream of a little bit that came in this poem, which is about Tom Gunn. If I can find it. It happened in the middle of the night, so I called it 3 at 4:43. Light torn by trees, a cafe, a girl, and a gray man. A windstorm must have struck him. Her eyes follow his frayed collars and hair. Then another girl is talking. My friend saw my chili tattoo and called it a carrot, so I had it removed. Now a ghost chili carrot. And here comes my friend, limping on his heavy boot, the heel come off. The cobbler's shop appears, and I buy the black nails, the dwarf's hammer, glue and strapping. I work hard on it, bending there, until he speaks and walks on. But as he is dead, his voice and step make no sound. I have the good fortune of having loyal editors at the University of Chicago Press, and they okayed this book, which is my latest. It's long ago, I guess, at this point. Fort Necessity, which is, in a way, an answer to my father's discovering how the body showed the work it did. And I tried to write poems that showed the work the body did, specifically steel workers in Pennsylvania. I took historical materials and shaped them into lyric poems. So it has, I'm very pleased it has a menu in it, and court proceedings and histories and novels and such. But I'm not going to read from that because it's more of a commitment than I think we need here. I have some occasional poems. One of them is about an AIDS camp where everybody has AIDS who's there, and therefore they don't have to worry about things that everybody else worries about. Grace, if I had a secretary, she would fire me. This is called Second Eden. And it's a little bit like a Thomas Hardy poem, so I put Thomas Hardy in there. Second Eden. The blood their parents gave them seemed like original sin. Hugs and kisses, saliva or cuts might pull another child in. They're careful at the park, for carefulness will save them from spending their inheritance, the blood their parents gave them. But when they come to AIDS camp, they play and wrestle and run. No fear of giving infections until visitors come. I have a friend who always predicts everything bad. Whatever's happening, it's, will it turn out this way or that way? It'll turn out negative. So I consider it like spending, like you had a certain amount of a sense of a good future, and you're playing against it, playing against your choices and chances. So this is called the coin purse. She said, I always talk against my chances, paint a picture of what I want, and show the ways I won't get it. I fill up a room of desires, tally all the pieces there, and then, like the moving man, carry out the cargo. Such freedom. When it's empty, that is, when I see my listeners' eyes drop, finding the room cleaned out, the dusty air and echoing voice, then I click the conversation off, snap it like a little coin purse. I hoard my luck. I have a set of poems called The Ego Anthology. There's so much to write about. The ego. And they're sonnets. This one is about running into your psychiatrist after he's retired. It's called Service Ego. She sees him shuffle crabwise down the meat aisle. Is he that old? Am I? Years after the years of analysis. He grips a paper bag of papers, confused, slowly collapsing inside the black office suit he wore when torrents of intimacies had poured down his gullet, the years of, when he hurts me, I apologize. Load on him the causes, O muse. The sausages dangle above him. She takes his arm. Doctor, remember me? Are you all right? Once he had told her, you're no fireman, and he's no burning house. Now he looks up, the lockbox, the old child playing doctor. Oh, hello. You can't help me. I taught a little bit in the benighted town in Poland called Łódź or Łódź, and my contact there told me a little bit of the story about what happened to this town, which is a little bit like Lowell, Massachusetts, is an old manufacturing town that doesn't have a market anymore. This is called Last Stop Ego. The Berlin Wall came down, the markets opened. All this killed off downtown Łódź. Now our clothes come from China. Yet, after the mills closed, look, the snow turned white. We never knew. Old Poles stand in the doorways, staring past you, selling flowers or forks. Everyone you meet is drunk. Some guy throws a cat or a baby out the window. Should we be shocked? Łódź has two plans to save itself. Build an airport near the highway, or get tourists to visit the old train station. We were the last stop before the camps. Everyone goes to Auschwitz. Their hotels are full, not ours. We're building a memorial, and we've got the cattle cars. I actually sat in one of those cattle cars. How am I doing for time?
You have all the time that you want.
I want infinity.
You got it.
If we could make time stop, that would be very helpful. Thank you. I guess I'll read a section of For Necessity, the title poem. This is on John D. Rockefeller, who is, in his time, the richest man in the world. And primarily unhappy, and also had alopecia, lost all his hair. And a journalist saw him, and Ida Tombell saw him and describes him as an otherworldly figure, sort of cursed by his success. This has no relation to any reference to a richest man in the world who might be afflicted today. I see. Sorry. the first part is I'm describing his body, and I jump around in terms of who contributes this. It's a poem in documents, and the first part of it is about John D. Rockefeller. It's called Doll, and it's from the movie Jaws. The thing about a shark is he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't even seem to be living till he bites you, and those black eyes roll over white. Rockefeller at home. This is from History of Standard Oil. Family and servants trained to the strictest economy. No more gas burned than is needed. No unnecessary heating, nor wasteful providing. Concealment, a Chinese wall of seclusion. Diet of the pauper and the monk. Nothing for display, nothing squandered in the senseless American way to prove you are rich. The next section is his eyes. Small and intent and steady, they are as expressionless as a wall. They see everything and reveal nothing. Not a shifty eye, not a cruel or leering one, but something vastly more to be feared. A blank eye, looking through and through things, telling nothing of what they found. Forever peering into hidden places for money, always more money, planning in secret to wrest it from his friends, never forgetting, never restful, never satisfied. Corporate head, alopecia. The disease has swept Mr. Rockefeller's head bare of hair, stripped away even his eyelashes and eyebrows, has revealed all the strength of his great head, curious bumps and tightly drawn, dry, naked skin. His mouth. Its former mask, the full mustache, is now completely gone. Indeed, the greatest loss Mr. Rockefeller sustained when his hair went was that it revealed his mouth. It is only a slit. The lips are quite lost, as if by eternal grinding together of the teeth set on something he would have. It is at once the cruelest feature of his face, this mouth, the cruelest and most pathetic, for the hard, close-set line slants downward at the corners, giving a look of age and sadness. Grace has okayed this next poem, so if you don't like it, you can speak to her afterward. It's partly about presidential assassination, which is wrong. So I'm going to indicate my resistance to it. But I had a very fiery mother who her name was Ruth, she was called Ruthless. And she earned it every day. She was a ruthless pacifist. The poem is called Leopard Man. Mom once posed as LaGuardia's girlfriend and smoothed her way past an usher. She gets gas attacks at lectures and even gave herself a cardiac, worrying which cruise to take. A lifelong scrimmage between ambition and self-doubt has given her a fretful, pestering energy and a genius for quirky triumphs over cabbie, onion, and varicose vein. Working in a museum gift shop, she hears that Reagan has been shot and says, Hinckley botched the job. Was it that, or was it her rebuking letters, each one signed, an ex-Republican, so it hurt more? Something put her on a list, because the Secret Serviceman comes to question her. No sunglasses now. He's undercover and checking his notes. Young Spartacus, Gray Panther, quote, I'd wear a dynamite girdle and blow us both up. They'd never check me. I'm a grandma. The bronze breasts of an Ethiopian goddess almost touch his back. He doesn't see them, but I do. Generations of schoolboys have rubbed her cool nipples all shiny, big golden pawns. And I love to see my mother behind the counter, tidying up the fossil fish and reptile rulers, watching him walk up and whispering a sales blessing on the lot, a wizard of retail. He fingers some shark's teeth, chatting headlines, politics. Yeah, and what about his cutback on age-dependent children? He's a stinking lousy miser, that's what. This talking drum, see it? And the husk face? Both on sale. Back and forth they go. He schooled in interview maneuvers, she assuming a man so full of grudges would want a bargain. So tell me, what should we do about a man like that? We've all heard Mom blurt out assassination in answer to this. Now she muses, do? Well, I don't know. I guess we could vote him out of office? Which sends him packing, while Mom sits and rests her ankles, safe within her Old Testament justice and shopkeeper's courtesy. Encased nearby, the leopard man has seen all this. The leopard man, exorcist of his tribe when he wears the skin, who could suffer a vision and kill his whole family, and yet be spared because in dreams he sees the enemy clearly. He stoops behind the glass, a fusty mannequin. One eye points at Mom, but the other is painted too far to the side. His sight widens, and the world could fall within his gaze. Thank you.
We're going to, do you have any more poems just for our encore?
Yeah, I got it.
Well, let's go on then.
Well, but haven't they had enough? There's food and poetry competing with each other, and food always wins.
No, wait.
We're going to hand the poem out now, so
Okay.
you read one more for an encore, then we'll be all set.
All right. This one will take about 2 minutes. Okay. Thank you. The 1996 Olympics had a remarkable moment of one of the gymnasts injured and had to go and fly off the horse and do those ridiculous flips they all do. And I saw something that really struck me, but I didn't write the poem for 13 years. It's called Stick the Landing. It's about gymnast Carrie Strug, Olympic 1996. Because they are tiny and gaunt and strong, willow spine and sturdy cabled legs, because they are willful and drive themselves like sled dogs, the girls grow in the gym on spongy mats and liniment air, stalking the bars and beams and horses. High above, a boy hangs from the rings, a pocket Hercules, arms rigidly out, face of stone, a kind of machine-still crucifix. Yet the Yet the muscles tremble slightly, human and imperfect, the judges note, his body on trial. The girls are pixies, though their hands blister, and live inside a Peter Pan curse, are never grow-up darlings, waving brightly in tracksuits, fresh, unstained, no blood on the leg to announce the woman in the body. They clutch the last month of girlhood for years. In the stands loom their sisters, a haunt-eyed race of elves, waiting for their turn, picking at calluses, little Sandy, Chantel, or Becca, eager snapping birds, and the massive soft-bellied parents who slosh and jig at their bony, capering daughters below, their rocket jumps arched back in peekaboo, now puppet, now python, now scissors or yo-yo, yet all the while the minute failings of a hand or knee drop the score from the crevice of 10. The judges tap, tap, because they once had leapt, because they coach, because girlhood lingers in their eyes, they sit there, girdled, the weird sisters. Yet their masks did crackle once and betray a feeling, just once, in Atlanta, when Carrie, the littlest of Americans, hurtled toward the horse, ricocheted upward, twisting and falling. Yet her body botched the landing, toward the ankle ligaments, toppling her back. Mark and Stain were tallied. Hopping to the arms of her bear-like coach, who whispered in foreign accent, "One more vault, one high score, and we win." So she ran and jumped, desperate soldier, arching and spinning. And the feet stuck. But once she turned to face the judges, she lifted the torn leg like a fawn. Then it was that the judges gaped and jerked their hands to their open mouths and saw the ruin and triumph of it all. After the numbers, after the ribbons and medals, it was their hands that said, "Judge this child, judge this childhood that broke before you." So now we got a new poem?
This is the poem that you wrote.
I
that
did.
We're going to circulate
Okay.
and have people, perhaps you read it out loud for us.
Okay, it's called Xerox Man, and there's a subtitle, Running the Copier Machine. I think with this group I don't have to explain what a mimeograph is. Nothing personal, but Xerox Man, running the copier machine. Son of Mimeo, godling of increase. All day he nurses the needy machine, tipping creation's coal bin, reproduction without sex, the yeast of Genesis wrung from his brow. He copies, reprints the drooping daffodils, shrinks the dictates of patriarchy, and puts suppressed voices first in line, while leaves of ragstock lift from the bins, scanned and squeezed through the mangle. He dreams of surfing the replicant tide and falling into the original world, meeting the people he only sees on paper. Open Mike, who hosts a poetry show, spoken art, his chattering guest, and finally, the morose funeral bill. Since machine light won't take dominion, Xerox Man can escape into his job, spreading his loins under the copier lid. Black spit scatters him amongst the stars of Abraham, juicing paper after paper. Bring us your preening memoirs, your tired and poor villanelles, your huddled backside verso, and Candide's one buttock. Here are your orphan pages, darklings of the firmament, and here is your salt lick of Valium, dripping in the fields.
Comments or questions about the poem, or about the process of writing, or about the teaching of writing, which David did for 28 years.
Yeah. I wrote the last line first.
Ah, that's good to know.
I'm kind of curious, at 28 years, how have things changed, I guess, in your classes? Have you seen different things rise up recently, or has it been kind of status quo for how you see poetry in your classroom?
Well, I'm on disability now, so I don't have the latest of the encroachments of AI on the creative imagination. But poetry in the college context, when you're teaching at a place like Georgetown, where everybody has a thoughtful matter, but a practical matter, what next? As the economy goes, poetry goes in the inverse. I don't have many students who are crazy for poetry and would do it regardless of what the outcome is. And I've only had one student who's really broken through, Ilya Kaminsky, who I recommend to you as a great poet. Ilya is Ukrainian and also deaf, so the combination makes for a weird language. I accused him of faking his Ukrainian accent, but he didn't buy that. He's a big guy, and I'd see him walking from the library. His arm was out, books all the way up his arm. I said, Ilya, what are you up to? He says, Yale Younger Poets. I see him Tuesday after the weekend. I said, how are the Yale Younger Poets? Not bad, not bad. So he was crazy for it, and that is the upper level that I've seen. A friend of mine says he used to pressure student poets to write in certain forms, but he said the forms didn't relate to what their lives were up to, what they cared about. And so he switched over. He's not teaching by form, but he's teaching by area of interest. That makes practical sense, but I resist it. I think the poem has its own process and demands, and if people want to undergo that discipline, it's useful. I don't know that they'll have great poems to say for it, but they'll have broken their teeth on it. Yes, sir.
Thank you for sharing your poems with us. Enjoyed them a lot. I'm looking at this poem, and as you read it, down at the bottom, after the Stars of Abraham, it hearkened me to the words by Emma Lazarus on the Statue of Liberty. Bring us your tired and poor villanelles, your huddled backside verso. I wondered if that was consciously trying to remind the reader of immigrants or the Statue of Liberty, or was that in your conscious intention to hearken us those final couplets?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think "Bring Us" grabbed from Emma Lazarus, but I think it was just a formula. I don't think it has a reference to immigration or renewed presence or victory or anything of that kind. I had the last line in my head for a long time, and I couldn't figure out how to get there. It was sort of like you start at the finish line, and you can't figure out what race you're running. So it grabs a bunch of things, and I've always wanted to have a little community that has a person named Spoken Art or Open Mic.
Looking at the structure of your poem, you were speaking about structure and your students. You chose couplets for a poem about reproduction and reproducing and on and on and on. Why? Why did you choose couplets?
So you give me these questions. and I'm too sober to answer fully. It's an overwritten poem. The language is too cheery or involved or physical. And when you're doing couplets, the reader slows down. It slows down more than a sonnet because because of the line breaks. There's more line breaks and stanza breaks. And you have a half creation in the line going to the end of the line. And then the eye reverses itself and goes to the next line. And that process, enjambment, gives you a lot of options of what you want to put. Reproduction without sex is a bad joke, frankly. And but the next line is biblical, and then the line following that is just an academic satire of the line at the Xerox machine, where people start describing what they're Xeroxing in order to indicate that their Xerox is more important than the Xerox ahead of them, and they should cut in line. So it's moving rather quickly in modes and topics, and I think to stabilize it, put it in couplets. But I could be making this up. I don't remember, frankly.
I'm wondering about the line, he dreams of surfing the replicant tide and falling to the original world. So he dreams while making copies of copies. Seems as if putting himself further and further, or more and more distant from the original world. And I guess I wonder if there is futility there.
Well, I think the Xerox man has a dim sense of being further along in the process of creation. He's in a duplicate world, and he senses it, and so he thinks he can get to the real world of flesh and blood, but he's the frankly bad jokes of open mic and spoken art indicate that he never arrives there, that the original world is also a paper construct.
And would you say the same thing of those people who are making copies of, I guess, whatever it is? Is that there is this desire to disseminate, but through that dissemination getting at something real, maybe blood and flesh, as you were talking about?
That's interesting. What you're basically saying is that people become less original when they have a copy.
That's what I'm getting from the poem, and I'm wondering if you had something like that in mind.
I do now. It's a very interesting reading of the poem. I was invested in the physical making of the copy, and that's why I have mangle, which is actually one of the old things from washing machines, the two rollers, and you squeeze it through, and what you had at the end looked like a kind of wet fossil. It was squashed, and all its wrinkles were sort of made permanent by the mangle. So his effort at the end is to become real insofar as he understands what real is.
So you said that you feel this poem is overwritten. So I'm interested in what your editorial process is like.
My editorial process is I write a draft, and I'm very pleased with myself for about 3 minutes. And then I give it to my wife. My wife reads it, and she does this. And then I figure the marriage is over. Nothing irreparable, nothing we can do to save things. And then she reads it again, and then I get another one. And then I figure Jews always tell jokes all the time, and it wears down Gentiles in the same household. It's never gonna work. So then she says what she obviously was doing, sighing, is that there's too many jokes. So I remove a lot of the jokes and I put them in a little spot, and I swear that I'll use them in the next poem. So I write a lot of versions. There's probably 30 or 40 versions of this poem. I wanted the sense of, I wanted the Xerox machine to become rich and physical, so that you are physically or emotionally invested in what the machine is doing. The problem with this poem is that the problem is what it is. It's a satire. And it doesn't propose anything, it doesn't change anything, and it invites us to make an unreality to a person. I started it when I learned that at the Iowa Writers Workshop, whatever anyone writes gets copied for all the students. And I thought, who's the poor bastard who has to do this? I don't even know if that happens at Iowa, but that's what I heard.
Thank you. This isn't about Xerox Man. First, I want to thank you also for reading for us.
Thank you.
I Can't Shake Your First Poem, about your father's autopsy. And just a factual question. You say in the poem that you saw more than you should have. Is the fact that you told us your age of 13 significant? Was it significant for your father that he would not have brought you before you were 13?
It was hard to know what my father was thinking, but I doubt that he had that much investment in my development.
I'm just referring to the traditional change at the age of 13.
Yes.
And whether he was inaugurating you into his world at that point in a way he wouldn't have done earlier.
As I remember the dynamic, my brother and sister got to go, and I was going to go. And that I turned out to be fairly squeamish. And my brother and sister are doctors, and look what happened to me.
So he took you too soon.
Yeah, it took me too soon. I wrote this. Most of these poems are written in workshops, so they're, for better or worse, you're listening to my homework. And I think I wrote that poem, and I took a workshop with Seamus Heaney, and I think I wrote it then partly in answer to a poem of his about his father digging.
I was curious, you mentioned that your students responded better to asking them to write poetry aligned with their areas of interest. What did you mean by that? In other words, like economics or love?
I wish it would be economics. It's they're writing about themselves.
About them. Oh.
Everything is lightly disguised autobiography and self-analysis. So what my friend has done is remove the formal expectations and leaving the topic and area of interest and the passion to be personal to the student, which if you're teaching 18 to 22-year-olds, they're fairly preoccupied with things.
But did that not give them any good poems?
Did I give them any?
No, did they produce any good poems? Just letting them talk about themselves.
I have to follow on your comment. It seems to me that don't most poems, including your own, in one way or another, explore something in you or in the poet?
I was telling Grace and Amy on the way over about Billy Collins, who said that he had two features in his poetry. One is that he's has a Catholic family, and the other is that he's the only child, and therefore all the poems are about him. He says, I don't want you to think about anything but me. I'm doing this, I'm here, I feel this way, I think this way. The reader ratifies the power of recollection. You can cry over your poem, but I'm involved in a transactional opportunity that someone you don't know, you're not sleeping with, you're not related to, could find your poem on a copier machine or elsewhere and be moved by it. That the poem itself has the power to move someone. You may need the pressure on your side in order to produce that language, but I have a kind of radical, I suppose it's a radical stance. The emotions in a poem don't happen until a reader feels them. Students don't like that, because in discussion they will say, where'd you get your ideas from, and oh, this happened to me, and so forth. And the power of the poem is lost in conversation. But to my debit, I suppose, I insist that it didn't happen until someone read it and felt it, not noticed it. And that's what I hope for my poems. I admire your perseverance. Poetry and food competing with each other, I know where it'd go with me.
Can I ask a question about the second poem? If I remember correctly, I think the poem ends with, but he lives on another page.
Yes.
Maybe I'm overthinking. The but sounds surprising, as if he shouldn't have. But then I thought, surely the dissection that a poet can do is precisely the kind that you can cut open someone alive. And he lives on, something like that.
He's moving and changing.
Yeah.
So, like the Greek phrase, you can't walk into the same river twice. There's great opportunism in writing about your family. You have license to say certain things. But they have their rights too. There's a book coming out on Tom Gunn that has, I believe, in it a letter he wrote me attacking my poems, which was merited. And he attacked them for the kind of ethnic satire gambit I do. He said that the subject of the poem, the people in the poems have their rights. And one of the elements is that they're in time and moving and considering. And your portrait of them is flat. It's not as multidimensional, not metamorphic. So time offers opportunities for things that art doesn't tolerate. That's why we have the vita brevis longa ars. The art freezes the actions of time so it can be looked at and savored by the onlooker. Rodin thought that photography lies because it makes you think that you can establish the position of the bodies in the photograph. But every posture is a change of attitude. So it may be a kitschy answer by Rodin, but the sense of a posture is that it's not still, it's moving and changing. And I suppose if that poem tries to recognize the difficulty, the opportunism of the poet, and the difficulty of staying with the person who's alive.
I love Tom Gunn. He's a brilliant poet. It sounds like he has a problem with satire, not with your poems, because satire has to flatten. You know, Candide is not a multi-dimensional person, right?
Right.
So, I mean, not to take anything away from what you said about poems.
It's a weak answer. I
Yeah.
gave him, and he was saying I'm writing like Robert Lowell, and it's all the furniture in the house, and then I turn out to be the co-editor of the collected Robert Lowell. So I don't know what Tom thought of that.
Okay.
I did write a poem called Push Play that is couplets and fully, I wouldn't say perfectly, but fully rhymed. And and it was about a boy next door who tape recorded a bird call in order to get a bird to drop down to try to get its hatchling. And it was a cruel poem, and he liked that for its resistant form.
It sounds like you take a lot of things from the people around you, from your family, from stories you hear, and I also noticed biblical and other literary references. Can you say a little more about where you take from?
That's a good question. I would love to have you answer it. I have a kind of a garbage head, and a lot of stuff gets thrown in there and coexists in a disordered fashion. What I want to do in organizing things for a poem is I'm putting the verse into controversy. There's usually a couple of things that are scraping against each other, and then the poem has to figure out what it's going to do with that.
David, how do we escape our ethnicity? The thing is that the writer's life is a moral life because we're always deciding what's ethical. And you have been known as an exemplar of a writer about social conscience and morality and ethics. But when it comes to the personal, your ethnicity is so important to your work. I mean, when I started writing like Robert Frost. I copied every line he did, and then I couldn't understand why it wasn't taken by the New Yorker, because he was until I found out I was an Italian Catholic Jew from Trenton. And then when I plugged into that,
You also?
yeah. So, so when I plugged in, I realized who I was, and then when I wrote, it was real. So your ethnicity, I can't believe that Tom Gunn faulted you for that, because being a Jew is very fundamental to your work, and it's profound, and it has an Old Testament glow. So what do you say to Tom Gunn?
I wish he hadn't died so early, is what I'd say to him.
So you could prove yourself?
No, well, what to say to this? I was in the workshop I took with Heaney. I was trying to write villanelles about torture, which didn't work, I can say fully. But then I remembered that my grandfather, when he died and the coffin was being lowered, they had not dug the hole wide enough, and I was standing next to the funeral director, and he says, "It's not done right. It's hitting the side." And then the diggers answered, "No, we measured 43.4, blah blah blah." So that's one of those quirky things that just stay with you, because we were all dumbfounded and standing listlessly by the hole. And when I was taking Heaney's class, I decided to write an 11-syllable line, somewhat arbitrarily. And I did some sonnets with that and worked with him on it. Well, I think he liked it. I don't know for sure. He was a very kind teacher. But as far as the ethnic element, there was a certain transference between whatever background I have and his situation. You need the pressure to reveal something, and the problems that are knocking around in your head can be the source of a poem. My poems are limited in that when they make a joke, they often make you pay for your laughter. And that's a kind of cruel moralism that I can't really defend. The poem about Charlie Bernstein gets a laugh when, or I hope it gets a laugh when I say, tell him he wrote his books. Then the next line starts the story that he's killed. That's a cruelty on my part. That's not a moral virtue, but it's an attack on the reader it's setting up the reader to have an emotion that is then attacked. And that's, even that, as it succeeds in doing that, it's not justified. So I like that poem, but I see that it's an unjust poem, and it's making a story out of a misfortune, and that's what Tom Gunn was complaining of. I wish I were more talented and wouldn't make that sacrifice, but that's where I am.
Are you saying that you regret some of your work?
I regret all of it.
All of it, 100%?
When I read it, I think, Christ. It's a moral judgment, but it's not. It's an evaluative judgment, but I don't know if it's moral so far as it doesn't obtain to a category.
Can you bring, one last question, and I see others. Do you want to say a word about bringing Robert Lowell's work to the general public and what that took?
Well, my mentor was Frank Bedart, and Frank is a very unusual character. Sleeps all day and stays up all night. And it was the Lowell's amanuensis for years and years. We had established the copy text, which is the text that you take as the authoritative text. And Lowell was a great fiddler with text, and he'd change things all the time. Even when his bouts of madness were on him, he would still be re-editing. So we had established that, but my sense was a college junior is not going to know what to do with this guy. His range of reference is astonishing. I feel like I had a second PhD in Lowell, just tracking down the references. So that took several years and actually cost me a friendship because of controversies with the manuscript. It was delayed so long that I don't know if you remember Z books around the turn of the century. You can get secondhand copies. It seemed like a new thing, secondhand copies online. And we decided to have one look to see if anyone else had written on Lowell recently, and we saw our book. It had our book cover, it had our price, it was advertising a used copy. I don't know how the hell that happened, but I told Frank, I said, this is great. We can plagiarize this book. And they couldn't get us because it would be us. You can see what staying up all night does to you. They said it's due out soon, which is what they. Yeah, it was incomplete, and amongst the poets in Cambridge, I was being called Mr. Wolf from Pulp Fiction. The guy who came in and cleaned up the dead bodies. But it was delayed a long time, and Elizabeth Hardwick, his second wife, we asked her to have access to his books that she had in her Castine, Maine house. And she said, I'm not going to give you access to them because it'll just delay the book further. It's taken more years to produce this book than the works of Shakespeare. So we let it rest at that. And frankly, the volume was highly regarded, but I think has failed. I think Lowell is out and Bishop is in. And Lowell makes you feel stupid. You could look up the references, and you lost your way in the poem by the time you work your way back to it. And with Bishop, your set of feelings are sufficient to respond to the poem without further reference. So when they're taught together, Lowell looks like the preeminent poet of the steep hill you have to climb to follow all the things. And if you don't follow them, you disbelieve your emotions. And you don't do that with Bishop. When the man moth descends in the Bishop poem, he's quite unhurt, she says. He falls, but he's quite unhurt by the fall. With Lowell, he would be hurt. There's always pain. Lowell always wants to break your heart.
Can you be heard?
I do recommend Lowell, though. I don't know if I'm defaming him here or advertising him. he has a sonnet that ends, "This open book, my open coffin." And he has great last lines. He's one of the greatest last line poets, which never makes it into index. "Devotion walks uphill in iron shoes." Or this one, which would be taken as a cute political statement. "Corruption serenades the wilting tissue."
So you've given us so much here to absorb and reconcile to a certain extent. I'm going to misstate what you said, but on the one hand, you've told us that the poem doesn't have meaning until the reader feels it. And now you're judging yourself for setting up the reader and then hitting them with cruelty. I'm hoping I didn't hear you say that you make that judgment about all your poems.
Well, that's a maneuver in a poem.
Sure,
It
and
is.
you've talked about things grading against each other and how that's going to work out. But it's not all cruelty that is the trigger for the emotion in your poems, surely.
Well, to stand by what I said earlier, the cruelty in it is ratified by the reader. If the reader feels cruelly dealt with or tricked, you've maybe won your case of getting attention, but lost your case of expanding humanity. And
So
the
that's-
poem is to have us care and think about things that we normally wouldn't do. That's the concentration of the poem and why you're slowing down. You're entering a world that you have to negotiate emotionally, and the line helps you do that by not following the novel's path, which is psychology, context, linear narrative, and so forth. That's stripped away in lyric poems. And so I think now I'm judging the effects of the poem that I've produced. I stand by the poem, but I also feel its insufficiency.
It's insufficiency, or it sounded like you were making a different kind of judgment on the poems?
Well, my judgments have regret in them, because it's not a perfect poem, and every time I read it, I have this urge to change it.
I have to read more of them, that's all.
Well, Robert Lowell said, "I hear my ill spirit sob in each blood cell, as if my hand were at its throat. I myself am hell, nobody's here." The last two lines quote Milton. But he reworked that line over and over and over again. He thought it was his best lines, but he never was satisfied with it. And he always kept working on it. I've shifted the responsibility for that to what you're doing to the reader, not what you think of yourself. I don't know if that's good or bad. You're getting your 10,000 steps in today.
Yeah. I don't know any honest poets who don't feel the insufficiency or failures of the poems that they write. It just seems to me inherent in the art of falling short or failing better, or any of those rubrics we use to describe this impossible task of writing the perfect poem. So it seems to me I admire your honesty intensely, but I feel like every poet who thinks about their poetry is always seeing where it doesn't achieve, or I don't even know, not even achieve, just doesn't make it exactly. You're always unsatisfied with some portion of it or something about it that didn't click or something. Does that make any? Does that ring true for you?
It's the bad poet has the same worries about changing his poem as the good poet.
Yeah, no doubt.
And it's hard to poetry's hanging by a thread, and it's hard to take on a poet in composition and say this isn't working. Generally, I say to students, you have to start with something positive or your poet will jump out the window. Because they stop listening. They're so invested emotionally in the poem that they stop listening to the response to the poem because they're so worried about the non-event of their poem.
Yeah, David, I was the person making the Xeroxes of Xerox Man. And
No offense.
And I will let you know that because I was, standing over it as all the copies came out, I really did read it. And the more that we're talking today and the end of our discussion, I noticed that it's a poem about Xeroxing and kind of a critique of the image itself. And obviously the poet, you're working with so many images here, and that maybe, I'm just reading your last line, your tired villanelles, darklings of the firmament, and here's your salt lick of Valium dripping in the fields. And it just seems to fit with the end of our conversation here. That is this perhaps an ars poetica of some kind, a sort of a...
The salt lick of Valium is our ars poetica.
Yeah,
Sign
dripping
me
in the
up.
fields. Yeah, see, I thought you'd like that. You'd need some Valium when you're, considering the difficulty of poetry and the challenges and, what you were referring to.
Sure.
Okay.
What is there about your life that made you become a poet and dedicate your life to editing poets and teaching poets and presenting? What is it about you that did that? Why?
Well, I didn't write poems in college. I was kicked out of the English major at Michigan for showing up late for class. This was the liberal 70s. And in desperation, I majored in intellectual history. And no, I don't know what that is. Mostly history of science. And I was living in London, working at a restaurant and reading at the British Museum. And it turned out my house was 2 doors away from Keats's house, where he supposedly wrote Ode to a Nightingale. And I got started on some very simplistic poems. Larkin and Gunn were the poets I could understand, and Blake. And I finally got my senior's thesis done, but at that point I was interested in poems, and I was working construction and doing all those other things. I don't know what there is about it's a micro universe that if you have the energy to spend the time in, you can get something back from it. And the simplicity of the poem was engaged me, and those poets are very simple. They're not simple in their effects or ideas, but simple in the line. And I could sustain my attention on that. I probably am not needing Valium, but Ritalin. But there was no prescriptions at that time. So there was just simple lines to concentrate on. I started college as pre-med, and I played the cards I was dealt.
He played the cards he was dealt. Let's give him the applause he deserves. We are going to file to the book signing, which is right outside the door. And I'm going to ask you to take a calendar of our next events, which will run through May 2nd. We have coming up two women poets, Maj Dagama and Zaina Azam, who will be translating into Arabic in December. Oskol Melnichik, who is a very avant-garde Ukrainian writer. Michael Gushu and Kim Roberts, the Home Boys and Girls. Bob Hickok, who's so funny. Tim Siebels, who's great. And Gregory Orr, who's renowned. You wouldn't want to miss one of them. So I'm going to leave the calendar at the forefront here, and just pick one up so you'll know when to come back. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Stunning. His remarks are memorable. Thank you so much.